Good evening. Welcome to all of us to a place where the clocks are never quite the same, but we will declare it's time to open. On behalf of the Environment Committee, I'm glad you're all here. We can acknowledge Bill Roach, the chairman of the committee, and Neil, wherever Neil McReynolds, okay, he's in the back, who spent months working with the Puget Sound Energy to find the right person and a date that would work for us to have this program tonight. Neil has himself a history with Puget Sound Energy, and if he were doing this introduction, which had been our original plan, he would have included a couple of sentences of history. The organization has been here for 138 years. It has hydropower that is now serving much of Western Washington, and gas that they bought the gas company 25 years ago. And so they're serving gas to that same population, plus us in Seattle, including Horizon House. And they were smart enough to hire Elizabeth Purdy, who will be our speaker tonight. She is now manager, has worked her way up to become manager of community affairs for PSE, for the Puget Sound Energy Company. She was born and raised in Seattle. She's a graduate of Gonzaga University, and she also went and got a master's in sustainable development. Her career has been focused on building partnerships across sectors. She's worked through the Western United States for nonprofits, for city government, and now for the energy sector, private sector. Liz is a Pacific Northwest person to her core, she says. She's likely to be in the mountains, skiing or climbing, or on the salt water, or eating safe seafood, or harvesting goodies from her garden, and spending time with family and friends. A few of us had the fortune of having dinner with her. Now all of you will get to see what we were enchanted about learning from Liz Purdy.
Good evening, everyone. Jean, thank you so much for such a thoughtful introduction, and thank you to the committee for having me this evening. I can tell just by the conversation at the dinner table that we are going to barely get to the tip of the iceberg of all of the questions and how much content we really could discuss in this hour that we have together tonight. So I've prepared a presentation, and we'll plan to use maybe half the time or so for that, and then we'll happily take questions for the other half. And I like to give a fair warning that I'm not an engineer, which I think is a good thing sometimes, but can have its limitations. And so, as I said to Ruth at dinner, actually, that I need to know a little bit about a lot of different things. So that's kind of what this presentation is going to entail. And if you want to dive deeper into something, we can tackle it toward the second half. So I'll start. Jean mentioned we've been around for a little while. Puget Sound Energy is the oldest and largest utility in Washington State. And I am not going to try to give too much history because it turns out you have a resident expert in Neil. And so I would actually highlight that this book, I've brought a few copies with me this evening, which I'm leaving with the committee. It's called A Century of Service, The Puget Power Story, and Neil was absolutely fundamental in making this book a reality. So I will not try to take that over. He's your expert for the history, and this is now a resource for additional reading and maybe a book club later. But today, we serve 1.5 million customers across 10 different counties, mostly in Western Washington. One in Eastern Washington. I have a map here in just the next slide. And right now in 2024, we are undergoing the most significant change that the utility has ever experienced in our 150-year history. But with that, our core purpose remains, and that is to deliver safe and reliable energy to our customers under all conditions. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges and the opportunities that entails in the year 2024 and beyond. So here's a map of our service territory, and the dark purple color there, that is our natural gas service. We have about 900,000 natural gas customers. Our tan color, that's our electric-only customers, and that number's 1.2 million currently. And then the sort of red area, those are both our gas and electric customers. And so, as Jean mentioned, here in Seattle, we serve gas. Seattle City Light serves electric. And what this means is we've got 10 counties, just one on the opposite, the crest of the Cascades in Kittitas County, that I-90 corridor that runs over to Ellensburg. We have 6,000 square miles of our territory, which means we have a lot of infrastructure all over the western part of the state. I like to start just in terms of, we talk about the grid a lot and how significant of a system it is, and in real numbers, that means almost 24,000 miles of distribution lines, so the lines that are going to the end user, like into your home or business. And that means just under 3,000 miles of transmission lines, so the high voltage getting from generation to a substation and transporting it from the source of that power. For our natural gas customers, that means almost 13,000 miles of pipeline and just over 13,000 miles of natural gas service lines to the end user for your home or business. So just to paint a little picture of kind of how big of a company and how broad of a service territory we have. So in the last 6 years, Washington State has passed some of the most aggressive climate laws in the nation, often second only to California. And as my boss would say, we've seen more change in the last 6 years of energy policy in Washington State than we've seen in the prior 100. So these have all stacked up in the last, well, it's really 5 years, but of course they've been in the works for longer. But I won't speak to each one in depth, but I will draw attention to the upper left-hand corner here is the Clean Energy Transformation Act, and that was passed in 2019, and that really set the trajectory for what our future at PSC and all utilities in Washington State really entails. Since then, and we'll get into some of the details of that, but since then there have been additional bills that have passed. Some of them probably seem familiar. I was talking to the committee at dinner about some of the recommendations around sustainability and greening for the new building, and the Washington State Building Codes and Clean Buildings Act. Those are all things for new construction that are changing policies about how buildings bring energy into these newly constructed spaces. And if there's interest in time for the second half, we can certainly talk about the Climate Commitment Act and we call it the Decarbonization Bill, 1589. Both of those do have initiatives on the ballot to repeal them. And so we can discuss that a little bit. But all of this is sort of making up the policy landscape that we are operating in currently, and that we are both trying to find solutions for and implement very quickly. When I got hired at PSC 3.5 years ago, my director said that we are an old company functioning every day, serving our product, gas and electricity, to our customers. And at the same time, while this old company has to maintain operation and steady, reliable power, we're over here on the other side of the company acting almost like a startup, because we are creating solutions for problems that have not been solved. And now we're working to bring those two together. And she said that to me early on, and I think I nodded and smiled. But now, 3.5 years in, I definitely understand what that means and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, because we really do have these things kind of acting simultaneously. So to get into some of the specifics of what we're trying to do through things driven by the Clean Energy Transformation Act and these other laws, we are trying to bring our net zero carbon emissions down significantly. And what that looks like is net zero carbon electricity supply by 2030. We have to have 80% of our electricity supply be clean, renewable resources. And I'll talk about what they look like currently in just the next slide. But by 2045, we have to have 100% carbon-free electricity. So no greenhouse gas emission from our electricity supply in just over 20 years. For our natural gas sales, we are trying to bring those carbon emissions down. Our goal is by 2030 to reduce that by 30%, and then to be at net zero carbon emissions from our gas to the end customer by 2045. And then we want to be helping other sectors achieve their clean energy goals as well. So that might look like supporting infrastructure and programming for electric vehicles. There is a significant liquid natural gas LNG facility that we've built in Tacoma to help fuel the marine transportation sector. And we're also experimenting with renewable natural gas, hydrogen, because we have, as I named in the slide before, a significant infrastructure of pipes, and we want to understand if there are ways to put new technology and renewable resources in those pipes to continue serving customers. So that we're not, we like to say we have pipes and people. So how can we continue to use what's already in place to serve our customers? So if that sounds a little daunting, I think it's because it is. And we know that we have some pretty significant challenges ahead with a lot of complexities, a lot of layers and nuance to all of this. So the scale of what we're trying to do and the pace of what we're trying to do has not been done before. We're also seeing that the demand for electricity is significantly increasing. And I heard actually in our meeting, our all-company meeting today, our forecasted loads, we're actually seeing a demand that's about 10% higher than those forecasted loads. And obviously, we're trying to deploy these technologies, clean energy technologies, as quickly as possible. So things like wind and solar generating power, the scale at which we want to achieve those, they're not commercially viable entirely yet. And we can talk a little bit about that, but essentially how we solve the gap for when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing and we don't have significant reserves in hydropower to fill in all of the carbon emitting resources that we have to eliminate. That's what we're trying to solve for. And my next slide will show that in a little more detail. We also recognize that because we're not the only ones on this journey. I already mentioned California. The nation is also navigating a significant new set of federal laws. Also a significant of federal investment, unprecedented amounts of federal dollars being pumped into the clean energy economy, which largely happened through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, passed a couple of years ago. Some of those dollars we're starting to see really just now kind of showing up in our communities. It's taken a while to get the distribution and the allocation settled. And I imagine that that will be continuing for many more years to come, even with what's already been passed. And then we recognize that the grid is a little bit old and it needs to be updated and modernized. And so one story that I like to tell, so I work out of an office that's at a service center. So all of the line trucks going out, we have an entire inventory service field. And at 7 a.m., doesn't matter what the weather's doing, doesn't matter what season it is, those trucks are going out the door because they have projects, because they're working on this every day to modernize and update and maintain the current system we have. So there's really no such thing as an off day at PSC. There's literally 24/7, 365, someone in our offices managing these systems. And then we need to do all of this quickly in a cost-effective way. And we need to make sure that it's done with affordability and equity in mind, because it can't be that only the most affluent people get to receive the benefits of the clean energy transition. And so something that's somewhat new is our regulator, the Utility and Transportation Commission, is actually working with us and talking very specifically about equity. How are we ensuring that our programs and products and benefits of this transition are being distributed equitably? So this is a snapshot of where we are, and obviously it's not today because it's 2022. I did check, and we unfortunately have not submitted or published our 23 numbers yet because they always happen at the end of the following year. So this is the most current public information that we have that I could find. And basically, just so everyone can sort of see the numbers, of course, we know the Northwest has hydro, and that is still the strongest resource that we have. We have 2 hydro facilities that we own. One is up in Skagit and Whatcom County. It's across the county line. That's at Baker Lake. And then Snoqualmie Falls, the Snoqualmie generation facility there. We do have several natural gas facilities, and we do still have coal in our portfolio. So the first benchmark of the Clean Energy Transformation Act is that by 2025, we no longer can use coal. So as of 2 years ago, that was 23% of our makeup of this fuel mix for electricity, and we have to solve to fill that gap. Then we do have wind, 16% just a couple years ago, that is increasing. Solar, you'll see, I think it is now actually at 1%, but it is a slower developing generation resource for us. Nuclear, less than 1. If it's unspecified, which right now that pie chart shows 10%, that's about usually the resources that we have purchased on an open market, and we may not know the specifics of the resource that's being used. So this is just kind of a sense of how this journey is starting off and sort of how we are prioritizing what to bring in to make this ultimately 100% renewable. So in more numbers and a little chart, what this looks like by 2045 is 15,000 megawatts of renewable energy. And I know someone over there understands that unit because I heard a reaction, but it's hard to kind of fathom what that means. But just by 2030, for us to get that 80% renewable energy, we need 6,700 megawatts. And that is an equivalent of like a Grand Coulee Dam. Has anyone been to Grand Coulee Dam? So we're not going to be building those again, but we need to be making up the amount of energy that's renewable in the next just about 6 years, end of 2030. That is something like that. And then, of course, there's other comparisons. So, just 1,250 wind turbines and 45 solar plants and 10 battery storage plants. You get the idea. So we try to just kind of demonstrate what does this look like. And I do like also 700,000 residential solar panel systems. So I think that would mean just the population of Seattle entirely. So we know that luckily our customers can be our partners in this journey. And so these are 3 examples, and I'll talk in depth about one and can take questions about others, but about how we're working with our customers to partner on finding these solutions. So the first one here, distributed energy resources, that's a fancy acronym that gets thrown around for just meaning solar arrays or batteries. Instead of it being concentrated as a generation facility, they're distributed out into the communities. So this is a photo. I think this is one of our community solar sites. And they get this is an opportunity to put installations on public buildings. Schools are often a host site, and it allows these buildings that may not necessarily have their own means to put solar on them, they can become our host site and partner with us because it's another installation that we can support and get more renewable energy to our customers. Microgrids are also kind of a trending topic. That also could mean batteries and closed circuits for certain areas so that if the power was to go out in one area, you could have a smaller microgrid in a certain area with a generation source like solar, being able to generate the power, be stored in a battery, and then turn the battery on when needed to keep that smaller system operating. Another one is demand response, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. And then transportation electrification, I think we've all seen EVs. You may own an EV. We know there's a significant amount of infrastructure that needs to be built for charging stations in order for that to be viable for more people across the country. So PSE does have a pretty significant transportation electrification program, and that could look like working with nonprofits. If they have fleets of vehicles that they want to transition, we can help build programming around that with some incentives and navigate the transition with them. And it may be that there's low-income housing units that are being built and they want to have transportation electrification chargers at that facility. So our team works with all these different programs to ensure that those access points can be made for more of this electric vehicle transition. And then I wanted to talk about demand response for a second, because I think it's one of the most interesting parts of how we can partner with customers. Essentially, this is conservation of energy or energy efficiency. And we know that historically, you know, the biggest demand of power at PSC is in the winter because we're a colder climate. But over time, that has started to change. And so when our highest peak used to always reliably be in the winter, we're starting to see that we also have a really high and reliable peak showing up in the summer as well. So our coldest cold days and our hottest hot days. It might only be 10, 15 days a year, but of course our system has to be built to achieve the supply for those demands on those coldest and hottest days. So what this program basically does, there's a couple different versions of it, but we are trying to either incentivize customers. So this is a photo of someone, you know, going up to the wall to their smart thermostat. Some people like having that technology in their homes, and some people absolutely do not like having that technology in their homes, and we understand both. If people want to participate with us, it's voluntary, and we will incentivize them to work with us for something like a smart thermostat, where we can manage a electric run thermostat to knock it down a couple notches, a couple degrees. And if 10,000 or 20,000 households all take that action, you start to see a change in the demand of electricity. There's also just behavior change. So this is something that we've done this summer for the first full summer. And all we did was we said, hey, we're seeing a really hot day, and if you have the opportunity, we know the demand on the grid is going to be the most significant between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. because it's a hot day and everyone's coming home and turning on their air conditioning or any other electrical appliance that they might be reaching for. And we just said, if you have the opportunity to not use as much power during this time, we're asking that you do so. There's no incentive, except we did compare results among neighbors, and we would send you a report after and say, here's how you and your energy use during this time compared to your 100 neighbors around you. And it's kind of fun because people got pretty into it because they wanted to be ranked as high as they could. Really what we're talking about is just behavior change of this conservation and energy efficiency practice. And so what that turned out to be, this literally I just saw today for the first time, and I popped it in here because I wanted to show it. This was this summer on August 8th. And like I mentioned, the 5 to 8 window, in the first hour, we saw a reduction of 65 megawatts. So these are basically the trials. We're kind of testing, like, do people respond? Are they willing to? And we're not saying we want you not to have air conditioning. Definitely not. But if you've got a computer on and no one's using it, or the TV is running but no one's watching, if you turn that off and 10,000 or 20,000 other households turn that off, we start to see some actual change. So this means that we wouldn't have to turn on a natural gas peak plant because we don't have to go and generate that extra power. These are the types of sort of tangible changes impacting how much we're generating, and then thereby Association how much we then are either emitting or not. So we know that this comes at a cost. None of this is free, and none of it is inexpensive. And so what we've really worked hard, our bill assistance team has a variety of programs. And we, just a year ago, launched the bill discount rate for qualified customers, income eligible customers. And we recognize that we need to ensure that that barrier is eliminated. Make it as easy as possible for the customer who needs it to get that assistance. So that might mean having self-attestation, going on, signing up simply through our website. And we really rely on working with our community partners, because there are and that's really what my team specifically goes out to do, is ensure those partnerships with a plethora of nonprofits and community-based organizations, that they may have case managers, and they're really some of our best messengers and advocates into the community to ensure that the customers who need these programs can learn about them and get signed up. I could talk all about just the different ways we go about weatherization or energy efficient appliances. There's incentives that change constantly, and frankly, it's pretty challenging to navigate sometimes. For anyone who is a PSE customer, we have something called an energy advisor. And a lot of our customers don't know about that, but it is a phone call to someone that can pull up your account information, and you can say, hey, I noticed my bill the last month was really high. I don't understand why. I've also thought about taking some energy efficiency measures. What is available to me? And they would be able to tell you what the latest incentives are and tools for you to access as a customer. And so I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about safety as part of our culture at PSE. It is our company-wide priority to have a safe working environment. In fact, we actually start our meetings with a safety moment. So we would say something like, hey, the weather is changing. Please be aware that you're going to have fewer daylight driving hours. You need to get your tires checked, change your windshield wipers. And we would offer that reminder to create a culture of safety among employees, because the reality is I sit in an office a lot of the time, but about half my company is out in the field doing very dangerous work. And so we try to ensure that safety across both office workers and field workers is upheld. And unfortunately, in Western Washington, the new reality of safety for a utility is that wildfires have to be mitigated for. And so I think I probably don't need to remind anyone of various headlines across national events that have occurred, but this is something that PSE is taking extremely seriously. We have built a very comprehensive approach. It will continue to improve, and it's not going away. We are fully aware that this is our reality we are living in every season. So the new phrase, we still talk a lot about storm season, of course, just when the winter hits and the wind kicks up, and it's lots of response to outages. But now we also talk about wildfire season and the preparation for wildfire season. So what that looks like in terms of the program elements that we've built for wildfire mitigation is we have built in a significant electric operation of situational awareness. And I will just say, having watched this evolve the last year, the level of technology and sophistication around the data that we are receiving about our system is dramatically improving. We also brought on an in-house meteorologist, and I receive his forecast each day, which I really love reading. But we're looking at all of these interacting pieces, because we know it's really not one variable, it's an interaction of a variety of components that are contributing to these scenarios. We also know that our infrastructure, the grid, needs to be, the term is used, is hardened, but really updated, maintained, and becoming more resilient. Sometimes that means just actual physical changes on a pole. They can wrap poles in fire-resistant materials. They can change wire into, the operations team has all these cool show and tell pieces, but they don't give those to me. But they have something called tree wire, And essentially, it's a coated wire that's much thicker so that if the wind blows and a branch were to come down, it's actually protected from the live nature of the wire, therefore being a wildfire mitigation measure. We've also totally reevaluated and overhauled some of our operational procedures so that when there are wildfire circumstances, we know how to operate as a company, both from the electric operation level and from our customer communication side. And then this community engagement, talking to all of you, making sure that you know what we're doing, answering your questions, and then also hearing your feedback and bringing it back to the company so we can keep making this better, because this is new and we need to keep improving every year. So I shared this map. You saw the service territory map earlier, and this is our risk model for this year, and all of the data from the wildfire season that essentially just ended, because it's now October 3rd, so we're more or less closed out of this wildfire season. We take the data once a year of all the historical fires, of all the probabilities of different weather impacts, all these different weather patterns, and then we look at where our electrical grid infrastructure is, and we say, here's where we think the highest areas of risk might exist. I just make a note that Snohomish County, we don't serve electricity there. That's why it's not covered. Same with Seattle, as you can see. But the high-risk areas, as you might expect, are that I-90 corridor down here through Kittitas County as it goes out to Ellensburg. A little to the north, you have that Highway 2 corridor up through Skycomish on the way to Stevens Pass. And then even further north, you have the Highway 20 corridor with the communities of Concrete and Marble Mount as you're headed out to the North Cascades. There's one additional area down on Highway 410 through Greenwater as you're headed through that East Pierce County area out toward Mount Rainier. So what we did, and this was a significant component of what my team embarked on this spring, is we went out to all those communities, we had open houses, and we talked about all of this, and we got feedback about what questions there were, what we needed to answer, and how to best prepare. So one tool is called a public safety power shutoff. And essentially, this is when PSE would preventatively turn off the electricity to prevent a wildfire. This is absolutely a measure of last resort. And we did not have to do that this year. This is the first year that we've had this as a tool, and we did not have to use it. Avista Utilities, which over in Eastern Washington, they serve Spokane, they used it just last weekend on Sunday. And they turned off preventatively power for 1,500 people in a community that they felt, when the wind kicked up significantly and they had extremely dry conditions, they felt it was their best choice as a last resort to cut off that power. And that was on Sunday afternoon, September 30th. So we get a lot of questions of how fast does the wind need to be blowing, or how high does the temperature need to be, or what does the humidity need to be? And unfortunately, there's no one answer for those, because as I said in the earlier slide, we're analyzing all of these different interacting variables to know what the circumstances are on the ground, consulting with that meteorologist, talking to our linemen who are in the field, bringing all of that together for any decision making that might turn into a public safety power shutoff. And so there's a few different ways that outages can show up, and it's confusing, and very understandably. If there is an active wildfire, then we're going to hear from emergency response, the fire chief, and they're going to say, please turn off the power. Our crews are in the field and we need safety. We need these lines to be de-energized. And that's going to be our reaction because they have called to tell us to cut power. Then there is basically a sensitivity setting on the lines where you can more or less up the sensitivity, and we call that enhanced power line settings. So if it was to get windy or very hot and very dry, we might say we're aware of all of these circumstances and we want to up that sensitivity because we're concerned that these are starting to become wildfire conditions. And then again, that last resort, these are meant to prevent a wildfire. So this is not in the event of an active wildfire. This is to avoid that from happening. So of course you can imagine there's a significant amount of customer communication that we need to get out very quickly. We have a goal of trying to call and analyze these scenarios 2 days in advance of cutting off power so that people have the chance to prepare and follow with us what the circumstances are going to be. We will send text messages, we will call you, we will email you, but only if you tell us what your account preferences are. So when we're talking to customers directly, we say, please let us know how you want to be communicated with so that we know you're going to get that message. And we also recognize that there is a significant medical life support component. You may be a medical life support customer, and we absolutely want to know that. And so I did bring a couple takeaways if you're interested. I have a handout here on just the wildfire mitigation and programming, which I just talked about. But if you have friends and family who are a PSE electric customer and you want to share this with them to make sure that they know, this is called Preparing for Medical Needs During a Public Safety Power Shutoff, and it talks about how to go about getting your information to us so that we have it. We will call you individually, a person directly, if you are a medical life support customer. So, like I said, we've not had to do this. Avista just did their first one, and we know it's got a lot of very complex components to it. And one of those complex components is the restoration of power, because in a normal storm, you would see, the power goes out, and often you'll look on the outage map and it'll say, oh, the linemen are already working on it, and you would see a truck driving around in the neighborhood, and they might be out fixing it right away, even if the storm is still going on. Unfortunately, in a public safety power shutoff where we have preventatively turned off power, there will not be anyone working to restore power until that weather condition has entirely changed. We have to wait for that condition to clear. So we're waiting for that weather all clear, because we can't send our crews out to go and assess damage and start restoring until that weather's passed. The other part is that once we turn the power off, we don't know what happens out on our lines, because if the power's off, we can't tell if a branch has hit it. So we have to have visual inspection by all of our field crews that are out looking to see if there is damage or if there are branches or trees or anything remaining in contact with our lines. Once all of that has been done, and I will say it's fascinating because sometimes there's a deployment of helicopters and drones for really highly inaccessible areas. So it really is using all of the tools available to get that patrol done as quickly as possible. And then finally, we would work to restore and repair anything that's needed so that our customers can get back their electricity after that event has passed. So this is a messaging piece I just wanted to include because, yes, it is October 3rd, and you all are not PSE Electric specific customers, but I bet you know more than 10. And sharing this information and making sure that this is our new preparation reality, just like we prepare for earthquakes, just like we prepare for other natural disasters, this is a component that we prepare for now too. So that is the conclusion of my prepared remarks, and I know there's so much that we could talk about, so I will hand it over to the committee members that have microphones and happily answer what I can.
If a citizen observes a tree down over a power line, we shouldn't phone you because your phones are going to be clogged. We should email you what we've seen. Is that true?
Well, I'm a fan of calling no matter what. What you definitely shouldn't do is approach the line. So we actually have a very helpful video about if you're driving and there's a downed line, never drive across it. Do not get out of your car. Do not approach it. Always stay 35 feet back and assume, no matter what, that line is energized. You just don't know. So best to just assume. Our customer care team would be in circumstances where, trees are on a line, hopefully at the ready to receive those phone calls. We will accept any form of communication and route it accordingly. Do our best to get it taken care of. Get linemen out to take care of it.
I've always wondered why we're not making more use of solar. We have a friend back in Illinois, close to St. Louis, who put about 100-foot solar panel in his pasture field, and I think probably for 30 years he's been selling, the energy to his local energy company. So what's the hang up with that? It seems like that is a pretty good idea. We'd be nice if our energy here was coming from the ceiling.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Well, it's rather timely because I actually had a solar installer stop by my house this week. And it's interesting to hear what the conversations are because, again, to those incentives changing all the time, it's out of reach for a lot of individual residents. So you might be a renter and your landlord doesn't want to put it on your building. The cost, so we got a solar quote for our house. Our house was built in 1910, and we got a quote 2 years ago, and it was $29,000. And that was with the tax credits that were available. And then we started digging in a little bit more to the energy efficiency measures that we could actually take for that house, and we realized that solar might be like the cherry on top for us personally, but we had some other steps that we could take to kind of address more of the energy efficiency before we got there. And I was just talking, John, right? Jim, was sharing about his family that has also made some transitions. It's extremely expensive, and I think each household is kind of navigating what it looks like for them to really prioritize making these transitions. There are a lot of incentives. There are a lot of customer programs, and I think we're starting to get some momentum. From a utility scale, where these are big installations that then PSC would be buying directly from, not like on residents. We actually just announced a new one. And a lot of the conversation around power generation in Washington State is that some of our best resources are across the mountains. And so there is a new utility scale solar operation that we have just announced that is in, I believe it's Garfield County. It's in Eastern Washington. So there are more of those, but they are slowly coming about. It's not like California or Hawaii where you go and you see them everywhere. It's just been slower to happen here.
So on that same subject, there are, as I understand it, there are utilities that will capitalize house solar and then amortize it on the basis of payback from the customer for the in other words, the solar panel becomes part of the power generation for the utility. Is that what's wrong with that idea? Why can't that work?
Oh no, that's a great idea. We support that, and I think the term that probably would encompass that is net metering. So when a customer of PSE's puts solar on their roof, their bill would show the generation that they have created at their own home, what they used in their own home, and then what went back onto the grid. And they would get a credit for what they then produced to put back onto the grid. Obviously, here in the Northwest, it's like April to September is the primary peak generating. But there's so much that gets generated, it often ends up breaking even, depending on the size of your array and your installation and depending on what your usage is in your home. So we do, it's not a direct payment, but it would be a credit on your bill for that energy generated. Oh. For individual residents? Sure. So the question is, why doesn't the utility buy solar for individual customers, like residential customers? Well, here's what I'll tell you we do. We have grant programs for organizations, and right now we're housing them. We gave out $1.2 million for our green power solar grants, and those get housed on nonprofits because nonprofits, as we all know, maybe don't have the extra dollars to be able to put an array on their facility. They draw the power from that installation, and then the offset costs then go back to support their programming. So we do have a program currently for that. For individual residents, I think in terms of we are navigating what's going to have the greatest impact for the most amount of customers. So we would be putting our focus on acquiring those large scale generation solar arrays, not the individualized. That said, there's a significant amount of programs that are supporting residential installations and even solar installers themselves that have all kinds of opportunities that they're reaching out to their customers with. But I think in terms of where we have to invest our dollars, it has to be on the scale of these large utility generations so that you saw the amount of megawatts. We can count on these bigger sources feeding this humongous need.
Do you have any partnerships with corporations such as Costco, Microsoft, to put in a facility and also to start their EV charging on their property to, really make it an equal partnership?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can answer it in a couple different avenues. So when you say to create a facility with them, does that mean like a generation facility? Okay. So actually, entities like Costco are big warehouses, and some of those warehouse roofs are some of our best areas to possibly put solar. Corporations like Costco, Microsoft, those are, our top 500 biggest customers, and those are managed by our account managers. And they're constantly working with them to figure out, one, what are their goals? Because one really significant component we haven't spent a lot of time on is that all of these big tech companies also have, just like we have our laws and our goals, they also have their green energy goals. And they are actively participating as a player in the utility landscape now because they are trying to acquire as much renewable energy as possible too. So in a sense, we're partners, but out on the open market, we're actually competitors with entities like Microsoft or Amazon or Google because they're also trying to generate and acquire as much of that clean energy as possible. So that's kind of another piece of this larger puzzle. But we do have our account managers that work with those companies to figure out whatever the solutions are that they're seeking. If Costco wants charging is an interesting one because there's all these different players on the market. You see the Tesla chargers, there's Blink chargers, there's all these different companies, just like you would see a 76 gas station and a Texaco back in the day. Similarly, all these different electric vehicle infrastructure chargers are competing for that business. So we are one player in that and working with our corporations as best as we can with as many programs as they want to pursue. Yeah.
Is PSE taking a position on Initiative 2066? And are they taking action one way or another on that? And maybe explain what that initiative is.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So 2066 is I'm actually really glad you brought that up because I happen to have a slide. So 2066 is the initiative to repeal House Bill 1589, which just passed in the state legislature this session. It was the end of March when it passed. So first, let's talk about what 1589 does. What it does is it gives PSC a planning tool. So right now we file 4 or 5 different planning reports to our regulator, the Utility and Transportation Commission. There's a gas integrated resource plan, there's a clean energy implementation plan, there's an electric integrated resource plan, and none of them right now necessarily talk to each other. They can refer to each other, but they're not one comprehensive plan. And so the first thing that this bill does is it allows for one integrated system plan. And so right now, because this bill passed in March, we are in the middle of creating the rule making with the Utility and Transportation Commission about how that integrated system plan is going to proceed. And if this law does not get overturned, our first one will be due in 2027. The other thing it does is it takes accelerated depreciation for our gas system. The reason for that is if we are bringing down carbon emissions, last year alone we had a decline of 7% of residential requests for gas service. We know that over time that gas service will be likely declining given the policy landscape of the new construction and the customer choice to go into electrified buildings. So we know that, again, back to that equity component, some of the people that might be the least capable of making that transition would be lower income. And we want to make sure that the last person on the gas system isn't paying for the whole gas system. So this bill also allows for accelerated depreciation of that gas system so that the current users can help pay for the lifespan as it continues to exist and customers begin to decline. And then finally, regulatory mechanisms, it's more of the planning component with the Utility and Transportation Commission. And so what House Bill 1589 and Initiative 2066 has built a narrative around is that it is a ban on natural gas. And it actually is not. We still have an obligation to serve our natural gas customers if that is what service they want. So we do not actually have a position on 2066. Sometimes at PSC, because we recognize that we want customer choice to really drive what is available. We say we're technology agnostic. We are looking at all of the available options to meet all of the customer demands, and we do not have a position on 2066.
I've got a question about another part of the issue, and that is the system for the system for developing more energy in eastern Washington will require more pretty expensive transmission lines. Yet there are some other options, and I wonder if you might be able to comment on that.
Thank you, Bill. Yes. So recently, and most recently in September, the Sightline Institute did have a article about a concept called reconductoring. And there was a report that came out last spring, and it identified nationwide, and then specifically also in the Northwest, some opportunities for reconductoring. And I, in my layman's terms, would equate that to rewiring the poles. So the poles that already exist have conduit, have wires, and they're saying, hey, you could have a wire that is more efficient and could possibly carry higher voltage, depending on the circumstance, and you should think about doing that before putting in a new transmission line. And I would say that largely we agree with that, with the asterisk that it's all contextual and all very specific to the circumstances of various transmission lines and projects. So I happen to know a project actually up in the northern part of our territory between Skagit and Whatcom County where this is actually happening. There is an old wire that they have deemed just not to be as efficient as it could be as a transmission line, and they are reconductoring it. So because we're navigating a significant load that may be need to be brought over, we're looking at all of the options, and nothing, I'm not on the transmission team. That's a whole team of brilliant people, far smarter than I am, who are figuring out what this needs to look like. But this is certainly a tool in the toolbox. I don't think it's going to solve all of it, but I do think that it could potentially aid in some of the transmission needs that we have. And since I'm already seeing, I know of one project for sure, I'm sure there's others I don't know about, I suspect that's going to be a tool that we deploy. And I will say that I'm very aware of how significant an undertaking of a transmission line would be, because I was sharing with Neil earlier that there's a company, a developer that recently tried to just put a battery in a location, and received significant community pushback, and they ended up not being able to proceed with that development. And that was for about 60 acres. And we know obviously a transmission line would be far more than 60 acres of land use. So we recognize that, we really do need to navigate with all the tools to be able to solve for that. And reconductoring could be one of them.
Is any thought given to when a new development goes in that these wires be put underground?
Definitely, yes. Undergrounding is probably one of the number one things that I get asked about why it doesn't happen more. New developments, again, I'm not the engineer that looks at these, but when it's possible, we try to do that. It is more expensive by quite a significant multiplier. I think, again, like island communities in particular, Whidbey Island, Bainbridge Island, Vashon Island, they lose power because they're in heavily treed areas at the end of things. And they request undergrounding a lot, and I understand why. So yes, new developments, we definitely bring that into consideration. I think it's usually what the municipality or the county might be requiring, what the developer is interested in doing, and then what the cost sharing looks like for that to be undergrounded. But I have one of these sheets for undergrounding, and unfortunately I didn't bring it with me. We have about 40% of our system underground. And of course, you don't know that because you don't see it, which is a little disappointing because you can't really see how beneficial it is. But I think, in California, there's a significant amount of miles of line that are now going underground. And it's in the billions that it's costing. And that's all going to go to the ratepayers are going to pay that. And so I think we try to be really conscientious of when undergrounding is required, necessary, prudent for an expense, necessary for reliability. It kind of becomes like a sort of all those interacting variables of when that would happen.
Got a question over here. I think it's got about 3 parts. I lived in Magnolia, and we're underground, but power used to go out anyway all the time because when it came into Magnolia, it would get hit by trees or something, and we'd still be out of power, which was sort of a joke because, there we are underground. But the other question is, was that Cedro Woolley you were referring to?
Yep.
Did they end up not doing it then?
It's still kind of an evolving situation, but what action was taken last week is that the county commissioners in Skagit County, because the battery actually was not in the city of Cedro Woolley, it was just outside. So the county commissioners were the ones with jurisdiction, but they put a temporary 6-month moratorium on any generation or storage of electricity on land that is zoned natural resource ag land. They'll pick that back up in February, and they have a variety of public hearings and whatnot about whether to consider making that permanent, and that's in discussion right now. The interesting piece I would just comment briefly about that project is that developer we did not have any contract with them. It was not a project PSE was involved with. There's 2 permitting routes that you can go for something like these new energy projects. One is the local permitting process through the county, and the other is that Washington State, because we have all of these laws, and we know that these projects have to eventually get built to meet these goals, Washington State created something called the Energy Facility Siting Advisory Council, also known as FSIC. So that is the tool through which they attempted to get permitting at a state level. And of course, that causes a reaction locally because it's not the local decision-making process. So that's an interaction that I think we're going to see a lot more of as developers determine if they're going to have a state process or a local process. But that was one of the components going on in that project in Skagit County.
Where does atomic energy come into your program?
Yeah, so if I go back to the slide on our energy mix, it's pretty darn small. We have less than 1% of nuclear. So there's a lot of discussion around nuclear right now, nationally, internationally as well. Bill Gates has invested in a nuclear power company in Wyoming. And I think people see that it maybe has another opportunity to participate in how we have non-emitting resources. How we do that, where we do it, when we do it, I think is all in deep debate and discussion right now. Some people will say it's 5 years away and no problem, we can get it back online and permitted. And other people will say it's still 2 decades away. And I think my current VP, the person who has Neil's old job, will say, depends who you talk to on what day.
If you look at pictures of India or some other third world countries, you will see wires above streets and then people siphoning off electricity illegally, obviously. Does this happen in Washington State, and to what degree do you have controls over that?
That's a great question. I don't have any data on whether we have that problem. 2 comments I would make are, one is if it was a significant load of people, we would see that on the system. We would be able to tell where is this going if it's not showing up to our customers. So that's one piece I think we would be able to solve for. But the other is that vandalism is an issue for us. We do have, I mentioned the service yard that I work out of. We have expensive equipment, copper, and a lot of wire and metals that sometimes people are interested in. And we have had vandalism at our substations, and that did occur. Christmas about 2 years ago, there was a string of some activity at substations. So vandalism, and we keep pretty tight security and eyes on anything related to system misuse.
On your right side here, is PSE in the appliance replacement and weatherization business?
We do have a marketplace, yes, for energy efficient appliances, both residential and more commercial and industrial opportunities. So there's actually a whole kind of department to field those questions for our customers.
And do you actually do the work or contract it out?
Contractors would do the actual work, yep. We would help know how to navigate.
And could you give any estimate of how much it saves in terms of energy usage?
Not generically. I don't know, without the specifics of a building or an appliance, I would just be pulling a number. Yeah.
We read a lot about the heavy users, the Bitcoin mining, maybe AI or whatever. Are those facilities in your work zone, or are they someplace else?
So some smaller data centers do exist throughout our service territory, but we so far are not seeing the size of data centers like is being established in areas like Moses Lake and some of the county PUD areas of Washington State. I don't know of any Bitcoin specifically. There is actually, the Seattle Times did a pretty significant story series, I want to say in the last 2 months on it, and they did have a link to a Washington State map of data centers and Bitcoin operators. And it was really helpful. I found one actually in the town I live in and didn't know it existed, but it's quite small. And so it's not the demand and draw like we're seeing. I don't know if anyone's driven through Moses Lake recently, but on I-90, I drove there a couple weeks ago, and I was amazed by what I'm seeing just off the interstate. It's very noticeable what's transitioning out there.
Well, I'm sure there are lots more questions that will come to you. This happens to me in the middle of the night. But there are also going to be stories in the newspapers and all the other media that will be continuing to talk about changes in the technology, changes in the law, changes that make enormous difference to some organizations like PSE. And so keep tuned. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you, Liz. This has just been great.